everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Doc Talks News and Views. I'm Deborah.
And I'm Katrina.
And in keeping with the season today, we are going to talk about, we're going to treat you to some very spooky stories. Ooh. So we're going to talk about horror fiction for everyone.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about some of the things that scare me and why they scare me, and I was actually wondering about Doc Talk. I mean, Doc Talk lives in front of everybody in a terrarium, and I'm wondering what things scare Doc Talk. Does she get scared?
Yeah, actually she does. If little kids bang on the glass, as they are wont to do because they are so excited to see this amazingly cool lizard, she can get actually pretty scared, and she'll do something with her beard where she'll flare it out, and she does something called blackbearding actually, where her entire underneath her chin turns this dark shade of blackish brown while it's flared out, and that's an indicator that she is scared and she wants you to back off. In the wild, she's got a really cool function. So most of her predators in the wild are flying creatures. I do not know the Australian wildlife, so I couldn't name a single bird that she would be scared of. But her, the way that she deals with that is she's got sort of a third eye on the top of her head that allows her to sense shadow and movement behind her, which is just one of her natural defenses. So she uses that sometimes in the library, but because all of the sides except the front are closed, not quite as much.
That is really interesting.
Yeah.
So she really does have an eye in the back of her
She
head.
does.
How
She
exciting.
does.
Not creepy at all, I would think. I don't know. Is it kind of creepy to have an eye in the back of your head? Certainly not for Doc Talk, but good for her. Mm-hmm. And I think you just pointed out something that we should remember, to be respectful when people are frightened. I know little children get frightened of things. And is there ways through books that maybe you could suggest to help children with things that frighten them?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So any kind of children's fiction, and that's why we read scary stories with kids from little babies, because we do have some scary scenarios. They might not be the spooky monsters that we come to think of when we're reading horror fiction, but reading these kinds of scenarios that might bring fear into the situation with your child is a great way for them to work through that fear, to talk to a trusted grown-up about that feeling, and to kind of gain that that emotional intelligence well enough to deal with real life situations when they go out and experience them. So
I remember one picture book. I don't know if we still have it in the collection, but I remember one picture book I used to read with my son. It was very simple. It started with, in a dark, dark place. There was a dark, and it kept going on and on. And because I know fear of the dark is a very common thing for small children. But in the end, there was the classic jump scare, because you went through the closet and you found the box and you opened the box and there was a little tiny, cute, sweet little mouse in the box. So it was sort of a way of saying, no matter how much, I hear what you're saying about gaining that emotional intelligence of getting in touch with your feelings and feeling that anxiety rise up. And then in the space of a book, you can talk about how a lot of our fears really amount to nothing. And that's the reason for that. Are there some other picture books that you might suggest, or just any of the Halloween ones would all work?
Oh yeah, we have a ton of Halloween picture books. They're pretty much all gone now, actually, because people love these books. They go nuts over them. They just fly off the shelves every Halloween. We've got books dealing with monsters. We have books with vampires. We have not so spooky books where kids can kind of deal with the scenarios that they might meet while they're trick-or-treating on Halloween night.
That's very helpful.
So there's a wide range of topics. And I mean, we even have a great picture book on Sleepy Hollow. So the kind of the traditional story in picture book format. So yeah,
That's exciting.
there's a bunch of things that that kids can read that will scare the pants off of them in a safe way, so they can kind of learn how to deal with those feelings of fear.
That's
a healthy
interesting.
way,
So this starts at a very young age. This, we all know what fear and anxiety feels like, and how that feels for us. And it's great that we have these books to do this. I mean, there's lots of different ways to deal with it, but it's so good to just sit down with somebody and explore a book and talk about it. What happens when children start reading on their own? Like, are there some books or things that you would recommend that they, moving beyond the picture books?
Oh, sure. So I love this imprint of Scholastic's called Branches. And they've got a couple of different series within it that deal with scary situations. One's called Eerie Elementary. So it's an elementary school that's haunted. And the other one is The Notebook of Doom, which just is the coolest title, right?
Yes.
So, and everything that happens in this notebook kind of comes to life, and the main character has to deal with these creepy monsters with his friends, and of course the parents are nowhere to be found, or they're disabled somewhere, and the kids love them. They go nuts over these books, and I think that kids like it because they're able to see themselves in these situations, like, for instance, when there's no parents available for them to go to, that could very well happen at some point, where they find themselves lost in a mall because they ran off without their parent and now they don't know what to do. And so this feeling of fear that they're experiencing safely in the book allows them to then apply that, like, okay, I can do this. This is what the character did in the book. Like, he was very calm, cool, and collected. And so, yeah, man, you just can't keep them on the shelf.
That's very empowering for a young child who, as we get older, we rely on our parents and our trusted adults a little bit less, but it's so good to try to empower someone at such a young age that you're right, like, I can handle this. And it won't be a mummy, and it won't be a ghost, because we know they're not real. But it will be a situation that invokes that fear. And I love the fact that we can talk about how you can explore this in a book, go through that whole emotion, feel out of control, and then realize that you can resolve your own fears, because they do get resolved in some way or another. Are there any other titles you'd like to recommend? Or
so I just wanted to plug a different set of collections really quick. We have these relatively new things called Playaways. So they're kind of like an audiobook, where we still have audiobooks too. I'm looking at my Scary Stories by Alvin Schwartz set on CD here. But the Playaways do the same thing, except we all know that CDs are going out of fashion. Nobody has a boombox to play a CD at home anymore, and they're kind of getting out of cars too.
They are. After, I forgot which year, because my car for Honda was the last one with the CD player in it.
Oh, yeah. So they're coming out of fashion, but the Playaways are great because they're kind of like an audiobook inside this little mini device, and you can plug in either an auxiliary cord or headphones right into the device. You can play it through the speakers on your car or just into your headphones. You press play, you can fast forward chapters, and so I'm staring at one of my favorite juvenile fiction stories for kids that's scary. It's called The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. And it's actually read by Neil himself, along with an entire ensemble cast. I was really excited to see Derek Jacobi's name on here. So who was in one of my favorite shows ever. It's called Cadfile on PBS way back when. Anywho, going off on a tangent, but
no, that's great. Neil Gaiman, he's just amazing.
He's the master of children's horror fiction. Like, if you want to start anywhere or lead your kids anywhere to horror fiction, you have to start with Neil Gaiman, and I recommend The Graveyard Book. It's awesome. It's about a little kid. It does get dark really fast. Right at the beginning, there's a toddler whose entire family gets slaughtered. And then he toddles down to the local graveyard, gets taken in by the ghosts, and raised by the ghosts of the graveyard. Super spooky, very intense, great world building, and it's wonderful to listen to on the Playaways. So, yeah.
That does sound great. I actually, when thinking about how we were going to do this podcast, I actually did a little searching around on the internet, and I did come up with I found a quote from Neil Gaiman. It's something that he said at a conference in Vancouver. Someone had asked him about the psychology behind ghost stories, which fits right in with this graveyard story that he wrote. And he said that fear is a wonderful thing in small doses. It's good to be a child again for a little while and to fear not governments, not regulations, not the infidelities or the accountants or any of the other stuff that adults fear, but that fear of a child. Were you afraid of things that ghosts, they don't exist. And even if they did, they can't hurt you. So he has just like this great way, I think, in his writing of just pulling you back into that. You're a child and you're going to be raised by ghosts, but it's all okay because they don't exist.
Can step out of it easily at the end of the day.
Exactly. So yes, Neil Gaiman is, I would agree with you. He's a good place to start with horror fiction as an adult as well.
Hear, hear. How about you, Deb? I want to hear.
Oh my gosh, this goes on and on. I just wanted to capitalize that as we grow up. I mean, I have a couple of teen horror titles that I found. I have more books than we have time on this podcast. But I just wanted to go on a little bit more about what you touched on about why we read horror. And basically it comes down to something very simple, that life is hard. People come to me a lot and say, I just want to read something to escape. And horror fiction is not easy escapism, right? It asks you to do a lot. So you're suspending your the belief system in the world as we know it. And these novels will ask you to go on an emotional and physical journey with the characters, right? They want you to feel what they're going through. So you're invoking all of that sense of dread and gloom and fear. And sometimes you're actually right there with the characters, and other times, depending on how the novel's written, you're sort of a bystander. But all of these things, these horrible things are going to happen. And you feel like in the end, you have literally gone to hell and back. And it's not really fun. But this whole experience that we get as an adult through horror fiction is very satisfying. It's very fulfilling, and it's very thought-provoking. And it is, the old bibliotherapy thing. You can read horror fiction about something that you are afraid of happening or that you may have experienced at some level on your adult life, and it will help you, in some cases, work through that fear in that same place that you did as a child, in a safe, confined, between the pages of the book. And you know what? You don't have to finish a book that you're reading and you don't like. Yeah. You can skip pages, right? You can go back and forth. You could throw that book at the wall, and believe me, I have done that. George Orwell, 1984. But it is in this defined, sort of space where you can take your fears and leave them there. And I think that's one of the really good benefits of reading horror fiction as an adult. It gives you that place for you as the reader and the author as well to work through all your fears. Through your trauma, through whatever anxiety. And like you said, it's safe, it's controlled. And I just think that whole psychology behind that is just really helpful to humans, especially in our crazy real world, which seems unreal at times. I don't know, there's so much horror out there. I just thought I would touch a little bit on sort of the classic horror fiction and save like the thriller and psychological stuff for maybe another podcast. And also the post-apocalyptic setting shows up in a lot of horror fiction, but that's, to me, a whole nother like subgenre.
So yeah, it's definitely a different genre.
And don't you think like a lot of these blend? Like oh, this is a mystery. No, it's horror. No, it's really science fiction.
Yeah,
right?
so we put a lot of genre stickers on in the children's room, and one of the things that we've come up against in the last few years is just how do we end up not stickering anything at all on a book, because it would have a mystery sticker and a spooky sticker and a adventure sticker, and it would have every sticker that we own. So yeah, authors are definitely delving into different genres as they write.
I
great.
think that's, that it's that specialness to that book that where you can't put it into a category that I think is really attractive to some people. So anyway, Katrina and I are talking a lot of books. And before I forget, everyone who's listening, please let us know what you'd like to read. If you say, hey, I heard your horror podcast and I'm not sure what kind of horror book is for me, ask us. Yeah. I mean, for me, if you come and see Deborah and you tell me 3 books that you read the last time, I will find you a book in the horror, science fiction, post-apocalyptic genre that you might not have thought about reading that I think you might like. So definitely email us, come in and talk to us, call us on the phone. So this is kind of like our favorite thing, right?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Both me and Carly, who's the assistant children's librarian, we love horror fiction. This is our shtick. So if you want recommendations for your kiddos, and quite frankly, there is a lot of great kidlit that is perfect for adults too. I read a lot of it. Actually, one of my favorites is called Small Spaces by Catherine Arden, and it is super creepy. The adults get completely what's the word I'm looking for? Just they're not in the picture. The kids get taken into this other world by this creepy scarecrow. They have to wind their way. These giant creepy scarecrows are trying to find them in this cornfields, like the reverse Children of the Corn. I'm not describing it very well. It is amazing, and it was the first in a series that she's been doing. So, Catherine Arden, Small Spaces. Do it. Okay. Yeah.
So see that even as an adult, you can still get some great horror fiction in children's literature. That is amazing. So I'm not really sure where to start because I just mentioned a whole bunch of subgenres.
Well, how about a good ghost story, Deb? I love ghost stories. Oh my
gosh, a good ghost story. So I have a couple ghost stories. Ghost stories for me are kind of like, sometimes they fall under that whole Gothic thing. I know we've all heard of what is a Gothic thing? Well, you have to have a haunted place, a haunted house or a haunted place. Think about Stephen King's The Mist, for example. So, but the ghost story adds that other element. So we could start with the classics. You would want to read The Haunting of Hill House, or We Have Always Lived in the Castle, both by Shirley Jackson.
Ooh.
So I don't know if you've read any Shirley Jackson.
I haven't, no.
When I was going to school, she was required reading.
Wow.
So she's terrifying, and that's she's like the queen of creep, I would say. She's really good at her pacing in her stories, bringing up that sense of dread, that sense of doom. Nothing happens shocking. But reading Shirley Jackson, the hair on the back of your neck will stand up. It will be summertime and you will be freezing. She just has a great way. And the stories just, I'm trying to say the word. They will just so slowly creep up on you, you don't even know it. Another classic ghost story that you might not have read was written by Peter Straub called Ghost Story.
Ooh.
They did turn that into a movie. Movies are another podcast, folks. But Ghost Story by Peter Straub is essentially 4 older gentlemen sitting around talking about stories. And these are pretend stories. Oh, but one of them is not.
Ooh.
And so it's something from the past, right? That's a lot that happens with ghost stories. Something from your personal past will come back to haunt you, whether it's in a spooky house or just a place that happens. So I would recommend those in terms of classic ghost stories. I'd also have to say, for a real contemporary one, maybe our listeners should look at Paul Tremblay. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a Massachusetts resident. And so he's written a couple of ghost stories. He got honors. He actually won for the Massachusetts Book Award in
Cool.
I think it was in 2016 he was awarded it, but the book was published in 2015, and it's called A Head Full of Ghosts. This is a real contemporary ghost story. It starts off with the classic thing of, the family has issues. They need to go and resolve these issues. So let's just get away from it all and move into a creepy house. I don't know why we do this, but we do. Well, so is it the main character's bipolarism, or do we think we need an exorcism? And while we're at it, it's now become a reality TV show.
Oh boy!
So it sounds like really all over the place, but in the confines of this book, you're like, wow, like it really brings that present day feel to it.
Yeah.
So I would recommend. He's got a couple of books out, but starting with Paul Tremblay for somebody contemporary, and again. One more scary ghost story would be, and it kind of has that whole haunted house thing, would be Little Stranger by Sarah Waters. This takes place in the 18th century, late 1900s. And it's a story of a doctor, but it's written from multiple perspectives, so you don't know what's going on. So it's his version and the people in the house's version, and basically this brings up more Gothic than some of the others because there's a romantic interest, which is another classification.
Another little twist.
Yes, another little twist. As this doctor becomes entangled with a family that's living in this haunted house. So that's another really scary ghost story.
Love it.
Yeah.
Oh, that always does scare the pants off of me. The spiritual sides of things.
Well, there's lots of supernatural ones. I mean, and some of these end up as like they're called fiction, but my favorite ghost story is Beloved by Toni Morrison.
Oh yeah. Oh, I remember reading that in high school, way back when.
Yes, and that's my favorite ghost story. But there's lots of books about supernatural forces, right?
How about vampires? Do you have a favorite vampire novel?
Vampires and zombies and
and werewolves. Oh my!
And werewolves. Well, werewolves, no. Vampires. I have 3 favorite vampire novels.
3?
3 because I can't decide, and they're all actually different aspects of the whole vampire lore, right? Because a lot of folklore comes up in those kinds of the monster stories. So let's go backwards in time. So the last vampire book that I read that I really liked, my vampires are not romantic. They're not Stephanie Meyers.
I was just going to say, please
horrific.
Don't be Stephanie Meyers.
They are horrific. Yep, no, they're not. They don't sparkle. They're evil. So the last vampire book that I read that I really liked was The Passage by Justin Cronin. I guess it was a Netflix thing. Didn't watch it because the book was just so perfect. And it is kind of a lot of that post-apocalyptic genre, but the vampires are made from the evil government lab, and a small child saves the world, and all those other themes that I just really enjoy. And it covers a 100-year time period, and it's just a wonderful story. It's actually sort of like part 1 is one story, part 2 is another, and then the third part ties the 2 parts together. So I like stories that go back and forth like that. So I would recommend that one to anyone, really.
Cool.
And it's also, it has one of the best things that Stephen King puts in his story, a lot of empathy for the characters. So I find them really relatable, even though they're living in a world that is not real. And before that, the best vampire story is The Interview with the Vampire.
Ooh, I've seen the movie.
Oh, the movie was nothing. The book is like completely creepy.
Ooh.
So Anne Rice is a very atmospheric writer, and it's the Southern Gothic tale. She was a nice Southern lady, and a lot of the book takes place in Louisiana. And I highly recommend it, even if you saw the movie, because they're 2 completely different creatures.
Really?
And then after you read the book, you can come and talk to me about the vampire Claudia.
A different book.
Nope, it's the
Oh,
same book. The
okay.
vampire in Interview with the Vampire. There's mainly 3 vampires that are talked about. One of them is Claudia.
Ah.
But you have to read the book, and then I can talk to you about the vampire Claudia.
I can't
I'd
wait.
love to. Yes. So and you can stop right there. She has been written 7 or more, and she still keeps going because what she's done is she's taken the vampire lore, and instead of going in the traditional Eastern European Slavic lore that a lot of us are used to, she's gone a different route, and she's traced her lore through ancient Rome and into Egypt.
Interesting.
Yes. So all of her books are kind of a little bit about that culture. But the best and the scariest vampire book ever is Salem's Lot by Stephen King, which was my first vampire novel. And we can't say enough about Stephen King, right? He's sort of, our American horror writer.
Guru, yes.
Right. So Salem's Lot is his vampire book, and all I can say is do not read it at night.
Oh, that sounds like a challenge.
Oh, do not read it at night. I started reading Stephen King in high school, like most people do.
Yeah.
And so I read Salem's Lot in high school when I was supposed to, be getting up to go to school the next day, and I couldn't because the vampire was coming, and I had to have the lights on, and I had a cross in my hand, and it was horrible. And my mother came up to check on me like she always does, and she's like, I told you not to read Stephen King tonight, because she just knew that's what I was doing. So that's why I'm warning everybody. But the other piece of the story is my family used to vacation in Maine as we were growing up. And sometimes my father would go home to work during the week, and then he'd come back at the weekend. Mm-hmm. And one night she woke me up in the bed that I was sleeping in, and she crawled in. And I said, you were reading The Mist, weren't you? Don't read Stephen King at night.
Oh, The Mist. That was my favorite.
Yes, and she told me to just go back to bed, but she was reading The Mist. So The Mist, by the way, is in a collection of short stories. The book is actually Skeleton Crew. Mm-hmm. We do have it here. The Mist is an amazing, really creepy short story. Yeah, so the monster, right?
Yeah, yep. No, the monsters were, you get to see them piece by piece. I love the suspense that he builds because they're coming. You can't see them because the mist is hiding everything. Yes. And you just get to see one monster at a time, and then mass hysteria ensues, and you've got the crazy lady that wants to, keep I don't know. It's just great.
It's great. And so, let's go backward in time with Stephen King now. So in short stories, which I think, if anybody who is not sure if they want to try horror fiction, I would definitely recommend short stories because, and there are a lot of children's, right? Scary stories to read in the dark.
Yeah, and actually we've gotten several over the last couple of years. There was one that just won the Newbery Award, it was an honor award. It's called Scary Stories for Young Foxes.
Ooh.
And it's several stories, obviously scary stories for kids. But there's been quite a few that have come out in recent years. Sorry.
So, right. So there's the other ones for adults that I would recommend if you want to maybe try a short story, even if you don't read short stories, but you want to start getting into horror. Let's go backwards. Start with any one of the Stephen King collections. Some of his short stories are actually novellas, and I think The Mist might be one of them. That's more than what would be a standard short story page, but it's a smaller contained. Or you could go read H.P. Lovecraft or anything by Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, many of us have read stuff from Edgar Allan Poe in school, but I mean, coming back to it as an adult, it's a whole different experience. So I would recommend Lovecraft and Poe as well as Stephen King for a good place to start. Did you say something about?
Awesome.
Yes. Did you say something about zombies?
Tell me about zombies.
Okay, 2 quick zombie stories. One is the original, which is the original for me. The first one I read, so I have 2 favorite zombie stories. The first one I read that I loved was by Richard Matheson, I Am Legend.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, that one's been around for a while. There's been 2 movie adaptations.
Yes.
The second one's better. but the book is even creepier.
Ooh, I didn't know
book
that.
is great.
Is the second one the Will Smith one?
The Will
I
Smith
love
one,
Will
which
Smith.
is, I love Will Smith too, and he does a great job, but the ending is very different in the book.
Okay. Ooh, I'll have to check that out.
Yes. All right. And the other one that I read was also turned into a film, but as a book, I think it does a really good job with the zombie trope. It's because you don't know who the zombies are until halfway through the book.
Oh, cool.
So
that
and
is different.
I think the main character is like 12 or 13. I don't remember.
Wow. What was that one called again?
The Girl with All the Gifts.
The Girl with All the Gifts.
And that one, as far as zombie stories go, has one of the most satisfying endings I've read in a long time. So that one's that's a good,
love it.
good scary story to start with, if for zombies.
Very cool.
I've got some graphic novels. And I still didn't. Let's see. I didn't go through any of my. There's another supernatural one. Will you be able to edit all of this? Because I'm all over the place. Okay.
So in addition to short stories, we might take a look at graphic novels too, because those read pretty quickly. Do we have any horror-style graphic novels?
We actually have two upstairs. There may be more in the teen collection, but the two that I'm thinking about was back to Neil Gaiman again.
Oh, yeah.
Because he did The Sandman.
Oh.
Right? So there's, this was a comic book that were then bound together, like different volumes bound together. So I think, for the years that comic book ran, there was 20 plus issues as a comic book, or maybe more, and then they've been compiled into 7 books.
Cool.
Which is the actual comic books as they came out. So that again is called The Sandman.
The Sandman.
And I'm trying to remember exactly what The Sandman was, because of course graphic novels are compilations between the storyteller and many of the artists that write that. And so I would definitely recommend The Sandman. What happens in that story basically is there's an attempt to summon and imprison death with a capital D. But instead, in the capture of Morpheus, the Sandman, he has to regain the tools for his power. So it's like that classic good and evil, but you're fighting death.
Ooh,
so
interesting.
That's another way of approaching it.
Yeah, you get a nice visual representation.
Exactly. And the other one is called Witches, and this is again the spooky house story. The Rooks family, and it's local. It takes place in Litchfield, New Hampshire. They moved to a remote town to escape a haunting trauma. And they want to start all over again. But in the woods just beyond, there's some ancient trees, and, they feel like they're being watched, and somebody's hungry.
Ooh.
So, yeah, this is a really creepy one about, I guess the recommendation is if you're feeling some kind of trauma in your family, don't move to a spooky house, because the spookiness will bring it all back up again. But that brings us to why we read horror fiction, because it's a safe place for us to deal with our trauma. So I would definitely recommend that. There's only 1 volume out so far, and it probably compiles maybe about 6 or 7 comic books. So
cool.
It's one you could definitely get through and read.
Quickly enough.
Yeah, quickly. We've talked a little bit about some of the Gothic ones, other Gothic stories like that. We have this book in the fiction collection, but it's never on the shelf, so I've never had an opportunity to read it. But a lot of people say scariest book ever is Mark Z. Danielewski's House of Leaves.
Really?
Yes.
And that's so funny. I've never even heard of it. What's it about?
Well, it's about a young family that moves into a small home on Ash Tree Lane, and then there's something's wrong with this house because it's bigger on the inside. Not in the fun way the TARDIS is, but in a really, really creepy way. And what's interesting about this particular book is it was started online.
Ooh.
And then it just gained, like Stephanie Meyer's books, it gained all this popularity, and eventually it was fleshed out more and published as a book.
Wow.
So there's two little children wandering around in this house that's bigger on the inside, and they're hearing voices and unholy growls, and I think they do cross over, and their parents are trying to get them back.
Whoa.
So it's supposedly very scary and very creepy, and that's on Daniel Lesky's House of Leaves.
So you'll have to put a hold on it because it's never at the library.
It's never on the shelf. It is never on the shelf. You know, and you can also read some of the newer, so that I don't know when that was actually published, but, you know, out this year is a take on the Gothic novel that takes place in Mexico. And it's called Mexican Gothic.
Oh, I think I heard about that.
You've heard about that
Who's
one?
the author?
Silvia Moreno Garcia.
That rings a bell.
And it's set in Mexico in the 1950s.
Yeah, what's that about?
Well, it's the classic, it's like all those stories I read as a kid. It's the classic where something is happening in my sister's house or in my aunt's house or in somebody's house. So the main character gets to go there and helps solve the mystery of what's going on. And it's usually a crumbling old ruin, or in this case, this is a countryside home of Catalina's new husband. And they shortly find out that this husband and his family are really very McCrabe and not very nice people.
Oh, that's delightful.
Yeah. So it's, you know, they looked okay on the outside, but when you get to know them, they're really not. And what's interesting about Moreno Garcia's novel is that she's got some layerings in there that actually touch on the horror with racism and colonialism. So I think it's a very timely book.
Yeah.
And that may be one that a lot of people might want to pick up.
Yeah, definitely.
For a different take on the horror, the horror
genre.
Right.
Yes.
That whole Gothic creepy thing. I mean, there are the ones that are just gory too.
I don't like those ones.
You don't like the gory ones so much?
You know, actually, it's interesting you mentioned Gore. I think Gore is great for grown-ups if you are into that thing. There are some advisories that say, stay away from the gore with kiddos. It's not quite there. So a lot of the fiction that I read in the children's room, they don't have that in it at all. There's really no representation of gore or outright violence. Or that kind of dismemberment or anything like that. So I'll leave the gore talk to you, Deb.
Oh, well, I don't actually like the gore that much either. But some of the descriptions are like, do I really want to know that? Like one of the books that creeped me out so much, actually I shared with you. So Audrey Neffinger, who wrote The Time Traveler's Wife. Yeah. So I think that was her fun side.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we both read her Fearful Symmetry with all that body horror.
Oh,
do you remember that?
Oh, yes, I do.
Very well written.
Yeah,
Great book.
It was wonderful, but very spooky.
And very gory.
Yeah.
And some, yeah.
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 I mean, it was good. Wasn't like, there wasn't too much blood, though.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, the vampire books have lots of blood.
That's true.
It depends on what's like. If you like that kind of thing, like if you like watching that horror movie from behind the couch because you just can't look at the gore, but you have to have it there too, you really should read Grady Hendrix. I just discovered him a couple of years ago, and he is both hilarious and horrifying at the same time.
Wow, that's a neat combo.
I know. So what Hendrix does is he combines, some of the things I think that makes horror okay is because it's so unrealistic. And I think it was 2 summers ago he wrote, it's got a long title, let me see if I can get it right, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. and seriously, this vampire moves into the neighborhood and he inserts himself into the book discussion group and in the neighborhood, and he is just pure evil. And one of the women figures it out, and it takes her a while to convince everybody else in the group that he's not who he says he is. He's a vampire, and he's going after your teenage children.
Oh my gosh.
And there is this one scene with the rats. I mean, the book alone for scary, just that. Oh, he's just great.
Ooh, you should have brought in done a read aloud.
Oh no, because you have to know this character.
Okay, fair.
And then the rats come. It's great.
Okay.
It's great. It's
What's
really
this
good.
one?
And
What's
it's got a
this
very
one?
satisfying
You're so
ending.
excited about it. I want to know it again.
Okay, so again, he's Southern, so there's a
Okay.
lot of that tongue-in-cheek kind of Southern humor through it. So the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires.
Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires.
And then he did one even better.
Ooh.
For this year, it just came out. It's called the Final Girl Support Group. Okay, so you know who the final girl is in the movies, right?
Yeah.
Oh, Sigourney Weaver in Alien, right? And the Scream Queen, Jamie Lee Curtis, right? At the end of Halloween.
Yep.
So imagine a support group for all these girls who survived the creepo psycho killer. And so that's how he has it set up, that all of these girls are meeting because they're the final girl, and
Oh
they're
my
working
gosh.
through that whole trauma of that.
Oh my gosh.
And of course, one of the killers comes back. So that's what that book is all about. That one's brandy new, and it's
Wow.
just, I'm really looking forward to reading that too, because of the way, he takes these real life things and then just puts this horror twist on it, so that it's a safe place where you can work out all of your anxieties.
I love it.
And then another one that's sort of that more graphic in tone is Stephen Graham Jones wrote a book called The Only Good Indian. And this is one of these classics where the elders say don't do that, but they do. So a group of Blackfeet boys go out on the reservation. They go into ancient hunting grounds that is supposed to be only for the elders, and they kill a herd of elk. Well, they're not going to get away with that. And so,
Oh boy.
that Herbrus is met 10 years later with these horrible things that are happening to these children and then to these boys. And so then what do they do with it? So the thing about that, again, like when we talk about Mexican Gothic, is there's a lot of that stuff that comes out about, the guilt and the shame and the grief that's part of reservation life for our Native Americans, and both of those who stay and those who leave. And Stephen Graham Jones is from the Blackfeet tribe, so he
Cool.
talks about that in this novel.
Very cool.
Just works it out, the author working out the horrors in a book and sharing it with all of us. So
That's
I think that
awesome.
is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's it, unless you have more like my favorite horror things. I have a recommendation for you, Katrina. We're
Ooh,
going
what?
through all of this.
I love it. What?
So I'm going to recommend to you Broken Monsters by Lauren Beukes. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right.
I don't know.
Beukes.
Sure.
So, and the reason why I'm recommending this, because we were talking about all the stickers in children's.
Yeah.
So this is perfect, because this is another one of those novels that, is it a mystery? Is it a horror story?
Ah.
What is it? It starts with a dead body, so I'm thinking right away mystery. But the problem with this dead body is the upper body of a boy
Huh.
is affixed to the lower half of a deer.
Ew.
Yeah, ew. So there's like the creepy part of it. But the detective, she's seen a lot of these freakish murders before, I think. I'm trying to think of what city she's from. Big city, like Chicago, Detroit. But the whole book is really about how she tracks down this killer and what it means to her.
Oh,
So the title again is Broken Monsters.
Broken Monsters.
Broken Monsters.
Sounds creepy.
Yes.
I love a good creepy story.
I think you're going to like this one.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. So we've been talking a lot about books that work well for adults and books that work well for children's. And then there are the teens in between. I mean, a lot of the adult books that I've talked about work well for teens. Any of the Edgar Allan Poe and the H.P. Lovecraft and the Neil Gaiman. There's a lot of that work for teens too. There's a lot of folklore now coming out in teen literature, and one story that teens might like that was just released this year is called House of Hollow, and it's by Crystal Sutherland, and that takes place instead of a spooky house on a spooky island off the coast of Alaska. And it's the Monsters in the Mist sort of thing. It's very fast-paced. And there's some body horror in that as well.
All right.
So I think that one sounds really interesting. More haunted places, I would have to say White Smoke by Tiffany Jackson. And this is another one where phantoms of the main character's old life are coming back as she's trying to start her new life in her blended family in a creepy house in a California beach town.
Ooh, all right.
Yeah.
Gotta love those creepy houses.
Yes. It's like household items vanish, doors open on their own, lights turn on and off, there's shadows past the rooms, and these, Mari and her siblings and her blended family have to try to figure out what's going on here. So it's, the way secrets find its way through the cracks is sort of that
cool
story for teens. And then there's another one, again, the children in your children's horror fiction. The teens in the horror fiction here are the only ones that know what's going on in a town called Small Town Monsters, and that was written by Vera Rodriguez. So this one actually goes a little bit more into the themes of identity and perseverance. Very ghoulish details. If you're looking for the good ghost story, I think you're going to find it in Small Town Monsters. So those are 3 teen books.
Perfect.
And then I do also want to mention something on the internet.
Oh,
So
tell me.
Yeah, so you can read this on the internet. It's actually a wiki site, so you have to join to read. And
Okay.
It's called SCP.
SCP.
Right. And that's sort of an acronym, but it's actually their motto.
Huh.
Secure,
Okay.
contain, protect.
Oh.
So it's a secret foundation, completely fictional organization. But it's a collaborative writing wiki. So if you go to the SCP Foundation website, that's all about, you want to read these things, you have to join, and it's collaborative writing, so you can add to it or you could just read it. And it is definitely fiction. And the premise of this particular universe, the SCP Foundation is responsible for capturing and containing various paranormal, supernatural, and other mysterious phenomenon unexplained by mainstream science. Okay? While also keeping their existence hidden from the rest of global society.
Interesting.
Yes. So when you join this wiki and you start to read about the SCP files, they're confidential reports. So they're written kind of like a scientific paper, so there's graphs and charts and everything in them. And what they do is they'll document an SCP object and the means for keeping it contained.
Huh.
Okay? So they're essentially little articles or short horror stories. And there's so many of them that are really scary, like the staircase that descends forever.
That's cool.
Or the creature that calls you into a body of water to try to capture you. And if he can't, you get called into smaller and smaller bodies of water so that you can...
What's the smallest body of water?
Well, how about a glass of water?
Oh.
Yes. So that he can capture you.
Oh.
So it's sort of like a quasi-academic style. And like there was one of them that if you continued reading, all of a sudden it stops and you're like, wait, what's the rest of the story? And then you realize, you can't read anymore because you're infected. So I just thought that that's another option for, reading some horror fiction.
That's really cool.
In a Creative Commons writing.
I love that. Well, thank you.
So I would recommend that. SCP, the
Love
SCP Foundation Wiki.
I love it.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Docs, Talks, News, and Views.
Ooh, the spooky session.
The spooky section, horror fiction for everyone. Find us at the Northborough Free Library on 34 Main Street. Please come in, talk to us about horror fiction or other stories or other ideas you'd like to hear on our podcast.
Yeah, or email us at podcast@northboroughlibrary.org.
And call us 508-393.
5025.
Extension 5 for me.
And 4 for me.
Yes.
Have a great night, everybody.
Don't read those scary stories too late into the night.